Swine flu has arrived in Europe. The first confirmed case is being treated in this hospital in Spain. On the front line, Gordon Brown says the Afghan-Pakistan border is the crucible of terrorism. Nearly 150 people have died from the virus in Mexico. From there, it has spread to America and Canada and may already have reached Australia and New Zealand.
And this is obviously a cause for concern and requires a heightened state of alert. But it's not a cause for alarm.
But, like everyone here, he is at the mercy of a virus that no one fully understands.
An effective vaccine against swine flu is what the world needs. There is no bespoke vaccine against the virus, but the World Health Organization announced today it had begun work on one. But this could take up to 6 months to produce, and there won't initially be enough to go round.
It's the breeding ground for international terrorists. There is a chain of terrorism that goes from here right to the streets of Britain.
The Prime Minister is one of those who fears for the stability of Pakistan. It is already the source, he's been told by the security services, of 2/3 of the terror plots in Britain.
Just last week, Gordon Brown went online to say he had the solution to the controversy about MPs' expenses.
We couldn't agree on what Gordon Brown proposed. And his reaction now has been to pick up his bat and ball and say, well, because you don't agree with my proposal, I'm not going to look at yours, and I'm not going to try anything.
Women's average hourly pay is still 23% less than men's, a situation the government regards as unacceptable. So larger employers may be forced to publish the gender pay gap in their organisation to try and encourage more equality in the workplace. But some argue there will always be a gap because men and women have different priorities in life.
But tonight, swine flu has reached Britain.
It's too late to stop the spread of swine flu, a virus on the move. But just how easy is it to get help for patients? Cleared of helping the 7/7 bombers, the men say the prosecution had no evidence. The big dig that could solve Heathrow's lost baggage.
Run! Oh my God!
They thought it was 9/11 all over again. Experts from the UN are about to fly out to Mexico. Their mission is to find out how and why this outbreak of swine flu started.
One of the problems with trying to piece together how far this outbreak might spread is that we're simply getting very little information. The fear must be that the virus has been here for some weeks, and for now, every person who travels out of Mexico risks spreading it further.
It's now 4 years since suicide bombers brought terror to travellers in London. Carnage on the transport system. 52 lives taken, several hundred people injured.
Barack Obama will mark his first 100 days in office tomorrow. Opponents complain that the government in Washington is being given too big a role in American society, threatening the country's free spirit.
They're running out of ammunition here. Requests for permits to carry weapons are up 100%.
Both the image of the plane and the scenes of people running scared were a reminder of the 9/11 attacks this city has tried to forget. But in fact, it was Air Force One doing a flyover by the Statue of Liberty for a government photo shoot.
A 12-year-old schoolgirl is one of 3 new cases of swine flu here in Britain. As the virus spreads to Germany and Austria, the UN says swine flu is now heading towards pandemic status. An embarrassing defeat for the government over the future of Gurkha veterans. It wasn't just hype. Scientists say an over-the-counter cream really does rub the years away.
It's hard to piece together exactly what the situation is here. The UN team arriving today has its work cut out for it as it tries to locate the exact source of this outbreak.
Understanding the risks is not simple because no one is sure how this disease will develop. Swine flu could die out in the coming months, but re-emerge next winter, and perhaps in a more virulent form.
The Tories and the Lib Dems seem willing to work together to defeat him. And in terms of controlling even his own MPs, Gordon Brown has a fight on his hands.
All remaining workers at the Birmingham van maker LDV have been sent home after the firm announced that it was applying to go into administration.
His foreign policy is a radical change from the Bush years, pulling back from Iraq but expanding the war in Afghanistan. He's closing the Guantanamo Bay prison and opening secret files on CIA torture.
Now, can a face cream really make you look younger? Well, scientists in Manchester say they've subjected an over-the-counter product to a trial, and it did visibly smooth out sun-damaged skin.
The study was funded by Boots, although scientists are adamant that the money didn't influence their findings.
It's over. After 6 years, the British combat operation in Iraq has come to an end.
3 more cases of swine flu in Britain. They backed down once, now ministers back down again over MPs' expenses.
Westminster was waiting, expecting votes and an angry debate on how MPs spend taxpayers' money.
The American carmaker Chrysler is expected to file for bankruptcy after talks between its lenders and the US Treasury broke down. House prices are still falling, according to the latest figures from the Nationwide. 500 jobs are to go at the defence manufacturer BAE Systems. There'll be many, many more cases of swine flu in Britain.
It's impossible yet to know how serious this might get. This computer programme shows how a pandemic might spread across Britain in a matter of weeks. The red dots are infected people who then develop immunity, which is green. And it all may not happen for some time. At present, it may feel like Britain is in a phony war against swine flu, but health experts say we must continue to treat it seriously without being alarmed.
4 people have been killed and more than a dozen injured.
It was to have been a day of national celebration in the Netherlands.
Convicted of a second case of child abuse, the boyfriend of the mother of baby P. A man from Falkirk is the first case of swine flu being transferred from one person to another within the UK. The number of people being declared bankrupt has gone up by a record 19%.
The defendant is the same man responsible for abusing baby Peter. While the death of baby Peter was shocking enough, it's becoming clear this case is even more disturbing than many had realised.
Mexico, the source of the outbreak, has begun a 5-day shutdown of cinemas, restaurants and other public venues. But with person-to-person cases now recorded in 5 other countries, it may be too late to contain this virus.
The economy, though, is still expected to carry on shrinking, with unemployment continuing to rise.
A police officer has been jailed for 3 years for causing the death of a Newcastle schoolgirl while driving at 94 miles per hour without blue lights or siren.
Some are saying Gordon Brown's eroding authority is almost an embarrassing hand-me-down from John Major.
A 10-year-old girl has suffered burns over 70% of her body after a session at an unmanned tanning studio. Her mother has called for unsupervised salons to be shut down.
She wanted to be brown, just like her older sister. So 10-year-old Kelly took her pocket money and went to a tanning salon.
Now, as you can see, there's a large sign here saying that children can't use the salon.
Unmanned sunbeds should be banned. They are so dangerous and we know they are so difficult to control. We say they should just be banned.
Shortages of health visitors in some parts of England could be putting young children at risk. Another 9 people across the UK test positive for swine flu.
But across the world, 21 countries now have infections, a total of over 1,000 cases. And here in the UK, there are now 27 confirmed cases.
So what we're seeing is this virus being passed from person to person to person. And that's what experts are looking for when they look for signs that this is becoming a bigger pandemic. Symptoms are still very mild. Does that mean we're overreacting? Even if we carry on at this low level, this could get a lot worse in the autumn and winter. And this virus has the potential to change and become a lot more aggressive. So people should still be very much on the lookout.
There is certain to be speculation about Gordon Brown's leadership after those elections next month. Until after those elections, it's unlikely anything will change. The future of Gordon Brown's leadership is sure to be on ministers' minds.
A meeting with Fiat's bosses, which could decide the fate of thousands of European car workers. And even cabinet colleagues concede that some jobs would have to go if GM Europe is to survive.
The European Commission says the EU will suffer a deeper and longer recession than previously thought because of an unexpected collapse in world trade. America has called for assurances from Pakistan that its nuclear arsenal is safe.
They are increasingly worried that with the Taliban getting ever closer to Pakistan's capital and with the Pakistani government apparently unable or perhaps unwilling to hit back against the Taliban, Pakistan is a nuclear nation. There are nuclear weapons there, and there is a concern here that those weapons could get into the hands of the Taliban. They've received repeated assurances in the past from the Pakistani army that that won't happen.
A policeman's been seriously hurt after being run over by a group of masked men. A health trust says a doctor who accidentally gave an elderly man a lethal overdose of painkillers had failed the patient.
The mother of 5 stabbed to death by a mentally ill patient. 31-year-old Tina Stevenson was pregnant with twins. Swine flu triggers a massive public information campaign. Mental health staff in Hull have been heavily criticised for the way they treated a man who went on to commit a brutal and fatal attack on a pregnant woman. A court heard that Holliday had failed to take his medication the day before the killing.
George, Tina Stevenson was a young mum who was looking forward to the imminent birth of twin boys. But just weeks before she was due to give birth, she was killed in the street by a stranger. 31-year-old Tina Stevenson was walking home from an antenatal class when a complete stranger fatally stabbed her in the back. However, they also admitted errors today in another case, another of their patients who killed his elderly mother after his treatment, his medication was changed.
The truth of it is that we don't know enough yet to be able to make reliable predictions, but flu viruses can change very, very quickly, and so our worry is that when we move into the normal flu season in the autumn and winter, this virus will change and will spread more easily.
As of this afternoon, the UK had 28 confirmed cases of H1N1 swine flu. Now, 10 of those were people infected in Britain. Crucially, at the moment, there's no evidence of further spread within Britain. 1,490 cases in 21 countries with 30 deaths.
Oh dear, an image of Gordon Brown that no photographer could resist. The litany of mishaps and misjudgments in recent weeks make it all too easy to assume that Gordon Brown is on some inevitable countdown to being turfed out of number 10. Easy, but wrong. What there is instead is disorganised panic.
Police in Bristol have named a woman wanted in connection with a suspected hit-and-run accident which killed an 11-year-old boy. A controversial Australian doctor who campaigns for euthanasia to be legalised has hosted a workshop in Bournemouth.
With its ageing population, Dr. Philip Nitschke thought Bournemouth would be the perfect venue for his euthanasia seminar.
For the first time, the names of people banned from entering Britain because of extremist views has been published.
And critics say scenes like this last year when the right-wing Dutch MP Geert Wilders was turned back at Heathrow Airport risk making martyrs of the very people the government wants to exclude.
The actress Joanna Lumley says Gordon Brown will think again about Gurkha veterans. The children let down by social workers. The government commits nearly £60 million to boost the profession. 70, that's how long you might have to work to pay off Britain's mega debt. Now, that wasn't the only awkward situation Gordon Brown found himself in today. He was also at the receiving end of a string of insults during Prime Minister's questions.
And there's a reason for that. The reason is we are going into an election period.
No one doubts he might have come into politics for the right reasons, but isn't it clear he's just not up to the job? The public know it, his party know it, and now the cabinet knows it. So why not do the last bold thing left to him? Call an election.
Mr. Speaker, I've listened to his 6 questions and not one of them has been about policy. He's never raised the cause of the unemployed in Britain once. He's not mentioned mortgage holders and homeowners once. He's not mentioned small businesses once. He's not mentioned the state of the economy and what we can do to improve it once. He's not mentioned the public services once. He's not mentioned health and education once. He's completely out of his depth when it comes to the big issues in the country.
There comes a point when stubbornness isn't leadership, it's stupidity. Well, at least I say it to his face. At least I say it to his face. You say it behind his back. Yeah.
We've got another year to go till general elections. Are we going to have to put up with this kind of thing till then?
Yeah, don't emigrate now, because I think the answer is no, you won't, but you will have to put up with it for some time. Politicians smell blood. Politicians here at Westminster smell Gordon Brown's blood. And brutal though it may sound, they want to make sure that the stake is well and truly through his heart and he can't recover again.
Baby Peter's legacy is already bringing change, but without more substantial investment, it's hard to predict whether it'll bring real transformation.
Total government debt will soar over the next few years, going as high as 80% of annual economic output. The National Institute think tank says to get it back to 40% by 2023, there are three options. The first is to cut government spending by 10%, the second, raise income tax by 15%, and the third, raise the state pension age from 65 to 70.
House prices in Britain fell by 1.7% last month and are likely to continue falling for some months to come. The last member of the Royal Bank of Scotland's failed top team is set to leave the group with a £517,000 a year pension.
President Barack Obama opposed the invasion of Iraq, but he's clear there is a war the United States has to fight. Obama's war is in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and it's a war that's not going well. He needs President Karzai of Afghanistan to clean up corrupt government, and he needs President Zardari of Pakistan to fight extremism harder. A country which rejects help from American ground troops. But the US think Pakistan's government is weak. In Afghanistan, military prospects do look slightly brighter, but America is not winning the battle for the hearts and minds of ordinary Afghans. Reports by the International Red Cross of American airstrikes killing women and children in western Afghanistan.
Manchester will become the first place in the UK where people can sign up for an identity card. The government says ID cards will reduce fraud and help to combat organised crime and terrorism.
Avenging the Gurkhas, Joanna Lumley puts the government on the spot. Scotland's biggest paedophile ring. 8 men are convicted of sexual offences against children, some just babies. Hundreds of thousands of people are to have their DNA removed from the national database.
Opposition parties say the handling of the Gurkha issue is no less than a shambles.
I mean, Joanna Lumley is running a brilliant campaign in which she's using the power of her celebrity, the power of her glamour, let's be frank, to give the government a complete runaround.
Is the world banking crisis finally coming to an end?
Yes, the Bank of England's used its big guns to try to fight off the recession. First of all, it slashed interest rates, then it started creating new money. So is it working? There was a warm glow around Barclays today. There's still gloom over the beleaguered car industry. House prices are still sliding, and the latest figures for the whole economy revealed a drop of nearly 2% in output for the first quarter.
Dare we say it? Is the banking crisis finally over?
For me, it means that the period where we have to worry that banks will topple over, that's past. The period of acute, almost unprecedented financial crisis is over, which is very good news. Unfortunately, we've still got to cope with the consequences of that crisis, recession.
The police like DNA because it helps catch criminals. Last year alone, 83 people were convicted for killings on the basis of DNA evidence. The enthusiasm for the database has meant everyone arrested in the UK, apart from Scotland, has had their DNA taken. Last year, the European Court of Human Rights said the database in England, Wales and Northern Ireland was illegal. The Home Office says reducing the number of records held will mean fewer cases can be solved.
The parents of an 11-year-old boy who died in a hit-and-run crash have appealed for the suspected driver to come forward. MPs scramble to defend themselves after details of their expenses are leaked. One of the UK's biggest steel plants is threatened with closure. 4 soldiers are killed in Afghanistan and rescued from terrible cruelty.
Togetherness was a long, long way from the Prime Minister's mind today on a school visit. He senses that the press are out to get him and his government. Today, The Telegraph published page after page after page of details of what was paid to whom.
What the Daily Telegraph are doing, that they're not saying, this is wrong and we have the facts to substantiate it. They are creating the perception of wrongdoing in order to provoke a public reaction.
The newspaper that got its hands on the material won't reveal who from, or whether, as many believe, they paid a large sum of money to receive it.
Now, There are over-claims made in the Daily Telegraph. Some of them don't stand up to scrutiny. Some ministers are able to say too much has been made of this. Some are able to point to the fact it is traditionally a Tory-supporting newspaper and is setting out to do them damage.
5 new cases of swine flu have been diagnosed in England, bringing the total number of cases in the UK to 39. More needs to be done to cut the number of children, cyclists and pedestrians being killed on Britain's roads.
Gordon Brown apologises for the expenses fiasco. The smart meter that could cut your energy bills. One by one, the party leaders have apologised for the expenses scandal. Now, all 3 leaders, Nick, have apologised. Do you think that's going to be enough to regain the public trust?
I think not.
By 2020, every home in the UK should have a so-called smart meter, which tells homeowners how much energy they're using and how much it's going to cost.
I've managed to save about 1/10, both on electricity and gas, since having the smart meter.
A baby girl has been orphaned after her parents died trying to rescue their dogs from a fast-flowing river.
Locals in the area are distraught. They say the couple knew the river and the area well, but it just serves to underline how dangerous rivers can be after several days of rain.
Another 10 people in England have been confirmed as having swine flu, taking the total number of British cases to 65. No one here has been seriously ill, a pattern repeated in most patients outside Mexico where it started. So, have we overreacted to swine flu?
Is it safe now to forget about swine flu? To date, we've had 65 cases of H1N1 swine flu. The virus has triggered mild symptoms. No one has been very sick. Now, crucially, there's no evidence of it spreading in the community. There's still no sign of sustained person-to-person spread of the H1N1 virus outside of North America. But global health officials think it's probably just a question of time before a pandemic, a global epidemic, will occur.
And if that does happen, then maybe at any one time we'll have 5 to 10% of the population who will be ill, and that itself will cause some level of economic disruption. This is not a disease we can ignore just yet.
So it would be a mistake to dismiss swine flu as a scare story. The story of this virus still has a long way to go.
Celebrity couple Katie Price and Peter Andre are to separate after 4.5 years of marriage. David Cameron reads the riot act to his MPs. Unemployment jumps by nearly 250,000. The drug lords are in retreat. The Prince, the pensioner and the apology. David Cameron has been wielding the big stick today. The Tory leader said it was time for politicians to start setting an example.
It must take a fair amount of money to look after a big house in the country.
The route to the Conservative heartlands, over the last suburban streets, out across the rolling green of the Shire counties. From Hampshire we headed northwest towards the Malvern Hills and the constituency of the most senior Tory backbencher. We did land nearby to put specific claims to Sir Michael. Today he wasn't at home, so we sought the views of constituents in the nearby town of Pershaw.
Absolutely appalling that they can do that, yeah? It makes me angry.
I think it's disgusting.
Disillusion which will be spread by further revelations.
Unemployment is rising faster than at any time in the last 30 years. A woman has appeared in court accused of causing the death of an 11-year-old boy by dangerous driving. The Vatican has defended the Pope after he was accused of failing to express enough remorse for the Holocaust. The international cocaine market is in retreat, according to the Syria's organised crime agency, and wholesale prices of the drug in Britain have soared in the past year.
Smugglers have had to put up wholesale prices by 25% since last summer, and purity on the street has plummeted.
And has to be indicative of the pressure which the importers are under.
Street prices, though, remain stable. What cocaine users have noticed is a drop in purity.
What's happening is the dealers are maximising their profits by selling a product that is potentially more harmful and much less pure, and a lot of people buying it probably don't actually realise that that's what's going on.
But now, the cutting agents themselves are a new front in the war on drugs.
Japan Airlines jumbo jet was left stranded at Los Angeles airport when a metal luggage container was sucked into one of its engines. Payback time over expenses after a public backlash. A Labour minister returns tens of thousands of pounds. Missed opportunities. The health watchdog names the NHS trust that could have saved baby Peter's life. They died on the same day in Afghanistan. The bodies of 4 soldiers are brought back home to Britain. No number, no sale. The smart credit card with an onboard computer.
The things that people are saying about me hurt because they oppose my values. And that's why I've had to think long and hard about what I do. And that's why I've chosen to take this route, to pay all the money back.
What do his constituents think about that?
It's an admission to me that he was wrong. Yeah, we'd have to pay it back if it happened to us, wouldn't we?
Does he have your confidence as an MP?
No. I'll vote BNP next time, I think.
Yes, you should pay it. There are worries, though, amongst people here at Westminster, people who worry that what is happening now in the rush to reform, that it will narrow the people who want to go into politics, and it may well narrow the people who can afford to do it.
A catalogue of errors allowed the abuse inflicted in this home. Peter's death has prompted some change, but much more is needed.
The Bank of England has warned that the recession is likely to be deeper than expected and the recovery slow and protracted.
On the one hand, we've got cuts in interest rates, billions of pounds of new money being pumped into the economy and a weaker pound. Now, these all boost the economy and push up economic growth. But people and banks are both trying to save money instead of spending it to help their own balance sheets. These weigh down on the economy and reduce economic growth. And it's not clear just how these competing forces are going to play out.
And on that basis, I think they want us to think rates could be lower for a long time. That's the signal they gave. But as I say, I think the risks are that this recovery ends up being stronger than they anticipate.
But even though we aren't sure what will happen, the bank thinks the chances are we'll have a slow and drawn-out recovery.
The Home Office has revealed that just 13% of people arrested under terrorism laws were subsequently convicted of terrorism-related offences. Nearly half of those arrested have not faced any charges. The Home Office says the proportion of people charged is similar to that of suspects detained for other serious offences. A nursery and a primary school in Greenock in the west of Scotland have both been closed because of 2 suspected cases of swine flu. The bodies of 4 soldiers who were all killed in Afghanistan last Thursday have been flown into RAF Lyneham. Hundreds of people lined the high street and nearby Wootton Bassett to pay their respects as the coffins passed by.
They died on the same day, and this afternoon they came home from Afghanistan together. Corporal Sean Binney from the 3rd Battalion, the Royal Regiment of Scotland. He'd been married for just 6 months. Corporal Kuman Poon of the 1st Battalion, the Royal Gurkha Rifles. Rifleman Adrian Sheldon from the 2nd Battalion, the Rifles, described by colleagues as an outstanding role model. And Sergeant Ben Ross from the 3rd Regiment, the Royal Military Police. His wife called him the centre of her world.
And scientists are now really alarmed about the rate of change up here. They say that it's no longer, as originally forecast, the end of the century when the Arctic will lose its ice in summertime. Instead, that could happen in a matter of years.
It's called, believe it or not, the EMU card, and James Nunn Price is taking part in a trial. It's got an onboard computer which generates a unique security number when you enter your PIN. The point is that nobody else knows your PIN, so if your card's stolen, it can't be used online.
One of my worries, I guess the same with everyone, is the threat from hackers and organised crime using my details fraudulently. The card helps solve that by giving me a one-time passcode to access online shopping, internet banking, my corporate email.
The key thing about this, of course, is that if anybody else picks it up, it's not much use to them. It's tied to my identity.
It's not just shopping, it's Facebook and Twitter and World of Warcraft and all sorts of other things. The DVLA, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, where I have to remember thousands of passwords. I would much rather use a simple system like this.
Passengers on board this plane in the United States had a fortunate escape after its tyre caught fire as it came into land.
I'll tell you what, 20 degrees in the sunshine in Scotland
was
today.
it?
Yeah, but elsewhere you're saying sunshine? What sunshine?
The first casualties in the expenses scandals. BT will axe another 15,000 jobs. Mission accomplished for the Arctic Survey team. It's the first time in nearly 400 years that a Lord has been suspended.
Reporters posing as lobbyists asked Lord Truscott to undertake some paid advocacy work for them. He agreed to work behind the scenes for a fee of £72,000.
With every new revelation, public anger has mounted.
Are our politicians any worse today than they were 50, 100 years ago? No. Are they worse than they are in other countries? Probably not. I think that there are some very bad MPs out there who've done shocking and dishonest things, but I think the great majority of these people are good.
The latest casualty of the MP's expenses scandal is a government minister. Excessive and flawed. The work has started on London's Crossrail, but can we afford the £16 billion bill?
Daily revelations about the parliamentary gravy train are dominating the political debate, making it impossible for the Prime Minister to get back on track.
Every survey seems to indicate that voters feel exceptional anger about the continuing revelations.
He's only done what everybody else has done, so I don't blame him for that, and I'm sure he was encouraged to do that.
Events are spiralling out of control, and of course much of that disaffection and public anger will no doubt be voiced at the local and European elections in a few weeks' time.
The bonus culture in the City of London was a lethal factor in provoking the banking crisis.
Because it encouraged banks like Royal Bank of Scotland to make billions of pounds of toxic investments. Sir Fred, the former chief executive of Royal Bank, is widely blamed for Royal Bank's collapse. The official cheerleader for banks and bankers insists they have learned their lesson.
3 new cases of swine flu have been confirmed in Scotland, bringing the total in the UK to 78. Now, the number of homes repossessed rose sharply in the first 3 months of this year. Now, President Obama is to allow military trials to restart for some of the detainees at Guantanamo Bay. We remember that one of his first acts on taking office in January was to suspend the trials.
The changes come because Barack Obama all the time believed that although the Military Commissions Act was flawed and he campaigned against it, although he believes that the Bush administration's setup for the military tribunals was wrong, he does not believe and did not believe that military tribunals themselves were a bad idea.
The Pope has concluded his 8-day tour of the Middle East with a message that peace is possible.
MPs turned their anger on the Speaker of the House of Commons. Sri Lanka's long civil war is over. The car scrappage scheme stalled on day one.
Please allow me to say to the men and women of the United Kingdom that we have let you down very badly indeed.
Many out there will not believe that we are serious about the changes that are necessary as long as you are in the chair.
My constituents, as most people's constituents, do not want to see you made a scapegoat for the actions of these members.
Prabhakaran began his fight for an independent homeland for Sri Lanka's Tamils 26 years ago, recruiting women, even children, to his Tamil tigers. His fighters wore cyanide capsules and had a cult of martyrdom. Hundreds of suicide bombers brought carnage to the island. They killed a president, an Indian prime minister, and 8 years ago destroyed half of the national airline. In Colombo, news of Prabhakaran's death was greeted with celebrations on the streets. It's possible the rebels could still have the ability to carry out some attacks. But most believe peace is returning.
Here, a councillor said there were no excuses for placing a disturbed teenager with a family whose young children he went on to abuse and rape. The government's so-called Bangers for Cash scheme has been launched, but it's already run into some teething problems. Some car manufacturers have suspended their involvement because of concerns about who pays the VAT. The trial of the Burmese opposition leader and Nobel Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi has begun in Rangoon.
It's been her home and prison for more than 2 decades. It's this lake her American visitors swam across. Whatever John Yetto's motivation, he's provided the ruling generals with a perfect opportunity to keep their nemesis, the icon of the pro-democracy struggle, in custody.
I have decided that I will relinquish the office of Speaker.
Under surveillance years before he led the 7/7 terror plot. Doctors in Wales are alarmed by the rise in measles cases.
Nick, interesting to hear the Prime Minister underlining some of the reforms that might come at the end of all of this turmoil. What did he have to say?
There will be a new outside body that will do all of that. All the rules, all the payments, all the disputes done by an outside body, and it seems the opposition parties are in broad agreement with that.
It was the first suicide attack on British soil. Multiple bombs that killed 52 people. At first, the security services said it came out of the blue, but then they realised they'd come across the bombers before. This newly released photograph shows the leader of the attacks, Mohammed Sadiq Khan, under police surveillance as far back as 2001. It emerged today that in 2004, MI5 only had the capacity to track 1 in 20 terrorism suspects.
The Sri Lankan president has formally declared victory in the 26-year civil war with the Tamil Tigers.
There were no independent witnesses to the final battle, and European foreign ministers have called for an inquiry into possible war crimes by both sides. For more than 250,000 Tamils driven from their homes by the conflict, the grim reality now is a government-controlled camp we visited in the north. In Colombo, though, they believe they are now free.
The problem, say doctors, is that in some areas, not enough children are being given the triple MMR vaccination.
At the very moment the Speaker was stepping down, they were cleaning up Parliament Street in Gloucester.
I don't think it'll make any difference. You know, I mean, there's others. All the rest have been bloody taking money that, you know, they're not really entitled to.
The Catholic Church in Ireland turned a blind eye to the abuse of thousands of children. Hazel Blears is forced to defend herself. The pensioner with terminal cancer beaten to death in his own home. And Europe's biggest onshore wind farm.
Well, you heard the Prime Minister's spokesperson this morning actually say the Prime Minister had full confidence in me. He thought I was doing a great job as Secretary of State, and I'll be carrying on doing exactly that, doing my job.
But the government said the Prime Minister said your actions were totally unacceptable. But
As
when your
Secretary
boss
of
says
State.
what you do is totally unacceptable, surely the alarm bells must be ringing. You must be thinking about considering your position.
No.
Cheat, shouted the heckler.
This morning, the Prime Minister said that a general election would cause chaos. What on earth did he mean?
What would cause chaos is if a Conservative government were elected and caused public spending cuts.
So there we have it. The first admission that he thinks he's going to lose.
2 men have been found guilty of beating and torturing a 75-year-old man to death during a burglary.
Last summer, police installed security cameras in the house. They ended up recording his final moments. They beat the pensioner with his own walking stick and stabbed him to death with a knife.
A 22-year-old man has been detained indefinitely in a psychiatric unit for stabbing his teenage girlfriend to death. It's Europe's biggest onshore wind farm, capable of generating enough electricity to supply 180,000 homes. And today the turbines in East Renfrewshire were officially switched on. Everyone over the age of 55 should be taking drugs to lower their blood pressure.
The idea of using pills to prevent disease isn't new. Some believe statins and blood pressure drugs could be put into one pill to keep older people healthy. Keeping active and eating healthily can also reduce risk.
Now, an extraordinary rescue after a mother duck built her nest on the ledge of a building in Spokane in Washington state. They were caught by American banker Joel Armstrong. He then guided them to the safety of a local river.
Victory to the Gurkhas as the government surrenders. Gordon Brown is forced to defend 2 more cabinet ministers, closing Guantanamo, and third time lucky. At the age of 65, Siranoff Fines becomes the oldest Briton to scale Everest.
Mr. Gordon Brown. So, for the Prime Minister, a good and a bad day, perhaps. Hailed as brave by Joanna Lumley for making the right decision, but seen by others as misjudging both the Gurkhas and public opinion.
3 cabinet ministers all in the spotlight. Jeff Hoon and James Purnell, it's claimed, did a similar thing to Hazel Blears. But what a contrast in Gordon Brown's reaction. Their conduct, he said, presented no problem. But Hazel Blears, who's paid the taxman back, was branded totally unacceptable. According to the tax rules, none of them did anything wrong. The scandal claimed its 3rd Tory victim today, Sir Peter Viggers. The Lib Dems had their own bad news. Their chief executive, Lord Reynard, is resigning for health reasons.
In her letter, Baby P's mother apologises to the boy's father for letting him down as well. Whether this statement of remorse will make any difference will become clear tomorrow.
The UK has a top-notch AAA rating. But today, one rating agency, Standard & Poor's, has warned the UK could be downgraded. Let's be clear, Standard & Poor's has kept the UK at AAA and says there's only a 1 in 3 chance it will downgrade.
Unfortunately, faced with an uncertain threat, our government made a series of hasty decisions. I believe that many of these decisions were motivated by a sincere desire to protect the American people. But I also believe that all too often our government made decisions based on fear rather than foresight.
Jailed indefinitely for torturing to death baby Peter. An MP complains that the expenses revelations are proving a bit much for them all to bear. British Airways announces record losses.
Today at the Old Bailey, the very people who should have been caring for him were jailed for causing or allowing his death. She's been jailed for a minimum of 5 years. His mother's boyfriend, 12 years in connection with Peter's death, but sentenced to life for the rape of another child. And the couple's lodger, Jason Owen, he received a minimum of 3 years in prison.
Whatever party it is, Labour, Liberal Democrats, Conservatives, MPs are all human beings and they do not deserve to be treated like this.
MPs ought to be concerned about what their constituents think.
Labour MP Ian Gibson will go in front of the party's discipline board. Tory MP Anne Main, it's alleged, also helped her daughter.
A husband and wife have been jailed for 6 years after stealing more than £500,000 from the Citizens Advice Bureau they ran in Wales.
Willie Walsh, the boss, and his finance director will work for free in July. It'll save the airline nearly £100,000.
This is Pakistan's latest battleground, the scenic district of Swat. Its military might is on prominent display. The military vows to keep fighting until it defeats the militants who gained such control over Swat. A resolve that will continue to be tested.
The BBC has learned a national network of cameras watching over Britain's roads will be in place within months.
10 million registration plates are scanned every day. Every single registration plate the system sees is logged and stored, not just criminals.
My office has very limited powers, we have very limited resources, we're not actively monitoring that area.
But it remains a secretive network that continues to grow.
And you can see more on that story on Who's Watching You on BBC Two. A man described as a monster by police has been convicted of the murder of 2 sisters in their flat in Birmingham.
International condemnation of North Korea as it carries out a second underground nuclear test. 2 senior cabinet ministers call for urgent reform of Parliament. A father of 4 is killed in an attack just yards from his home in County Londonderry. The number of skin cancer cases reaches an all-time high.
The announcement was made by North Korea's government-controlled media. It says it's in response to the international criticism of its recent rocket launch, which it denies was a long-range missile test. But some observers believe North Korea may have decided it has got all it can from diplomacy and has taken a strategic decision to walk away from the disarmament negotiations. Others claim, with the leader weakened by ill health, it's an attempt to shore up his legitimacy at home.
Thinking big thoughts about parliamentary reform may seem like an attractive way forward, particularly when they come from people like Alan Johnson and Ed Miliband. The Daily Telegraph said the Chancellor, Alistair Darling, had claimed £1,400 for help with his tax return, and the Transport Secretary, Jeff Hoon, £3,000. All up, the 9 ministers charged £11,000 between them.
And the Conservative MP Sir Nicholas and Anne Winterton are to stand down at the next general election.
In spite of the peace process, people are still being attacked in Northern Ireland because of their religion. It's believed up to 30 people were involved in the violence. Sectarian murders are now rare in Northern Ireland, but the killing of Kevin McDade shows that in spite of all the progress in recent years, in some towns a level of hatred still exists.
A British soldier killed in an explosion in southern Afghanistan yesterday has been named as Sapper Jordan Rossi.
Power to the people. The Conservative leader pledges to shake up Westminster. North Korea celebrates 2 further missile tests, and all roads lead to Rome.
There is only one way out of the national crisis that we face. We need a massive, sweeping, radical redistribution of power. From the state to citizens, from the government to parliament, we must take power away from the political elite and give it to the man and the woman on the street.
He wants to reform Parliament. He'll seriously consider fixed-term parliaments, and he'll allow councils to keep more of their money and take more decisions. And that's not all. Mr Cameron will allow parliamentary debates to be uploaded on YouTube. He'll send out texts. And if enough of us sign a petition calling for a change, our ideas will be debated in the Commons and perhaps even become law. There's a growing consensus at Westminster that parliamentary reform of some kind is the answer to the expenses scandal. Whether it's enough to assuage public anger remains to be seen.
The North Korean leader is maintaining his defiant stance, firing a number of missiles. The short-range tests wouldn't normally cause much alarm, but the timing is ratcheting up the tension.
All making it doubly hard to tell how North Korea might respond if the UN did tighten sanctions. The fear is the regime might lash out again, making this insecure corner of the world even more dangerous than it is now.
44 new cases of swine flu have been diagnosed at a primary school in Birmingham. The total number of cases in the UK now stands at 184. Burma's imprisoned pro-democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi has appeared in court in Rangoon. In the firing line, MPs fight to save their jobs as they're questioned about their expenses. We're live with fans in Manchester and Rome ahead of tonight's Champions League final. Over 20 people are killed by the third bombing in as many months in Lahore in Pakistan. Complementary medicine is offered for the first time on the NHS for patients suffering back pain. And the changing face of the high street.
Day 20 of the expenses saga that's rocked Parliament. The panel of 3 senior party figures will advise Labour's ruling body on whether any disciplinary action should be taken. They have the power to interview any Labour MP, and if they find wrongdoing, could stop an MP standing as a Labour candidate at the next election.
Very well behaved. All this attention.
David Cameron's shown less affection towards some of his MPs. The Tory party cull has already started. The Liberal Democrats are also going through the receipts of all their MPs, but Nick Clegg wants people to decide their fate.
At least 23 people have been killed and more than 200 injured in a bomb attack outside a police building in the Pakistani city of Lahore.
Pakistan's government believes today's bomb in Lahore is a response to its military action in the Swat Valley.
The Attorney General is to consider appealing against the sentences handed down in the Baby Peter case. A group of glowing monkeys are evidence that scientists have for the first time been able to genetically modify primates, and in such a way that the implanted gene is inherited by their offspring.
In total, well over 1,000 branches will be rebranded. Santander admits some towns will see branches merged, but insists overall there'll be no net branch closures or retail job losses.
North Korea says it's abandoned the ceasefire agreed more than 50 years ago at the end of the Korean War and could launch military action against South Korea. And you can find out if you're in a broadband not spot by visiting our website.
The expenses scandal claims more scalps as 2 more MPs say they're quitting. The Conservative Julie Kirkbride and Labour's Margaret Moran will step down at the next election. 2 years after 5 Britons were taken hostage in Iraq, a 7-year-old joins calls for their release in a letter to her father. Wise scientists are predicting soaring numbers of children with type 1 diabetes in the next decade. And as Barcelona celebrate their Champions League win, Manchester United return empty-handed.
In the end, for both Ms Kirkbride and Margaret Moran, the scale of local anger and national media pressure was just too great.
The problem for all politicians is that this crisis over expenses has induced such anger within the public that they find themselves stuck in the eye of the storm. They know the progress of the story lies with others, so the parties simply don't know how or when it's going to end.
2 British servicemen have died following separate attacks in Afghanistan. More than 700 jobs are to go at a Hewlett-Packard computer plant in Renfrewshire. The public boys' school Eton has closed for a week after a 13-year-old pupil was diagnosed with swine flu. 6 men have appeared in court charged with the murder of a Catholic man in County Londonderry on Sunday.
In 2005, there were 18,000 cases of children with type 1 diabetes. But by 2020, that figure is expected to rise to 33,000, an 80% increase. And most worrying of all, the fastest increase is likely to be in children under the age of 5.
Now, President Obama will be there, so too will Gordon Brown, but not a single member of the royal family is attending the 65th D-Day commemorations in France next week. The reason? It seems they didn't get an invitation. A 66-year-old woman has given birth to a baby boy, making her the oldest mum in Britain. A 90-year-old woman who died last year has left most of her £400,000 estate to villagers in West Wales.
The spotlight falls on another MP's expenses. David Cameron says Conservative Bill Cash has serious questions to answer. A new rescue plan for General Motors is on the table. Over 5,000 jobs in Britain hang in the balance. 3 men are convicted of the gruesome murder of a 17-year-old. In court, the first parent to be prosecuted accused of lying about her address to get her son into a good school. And Prince Harry at Ground Zero on his first official foreign visit. Norfolk police have described it as one of the most horrific murder cases they've ever had to deal with. 17-year-old Simon Everett was kidnapped, beaten and tied to a tree before being burnt to death. Today, 3 people were found guilty of his murder.
The jury was told Simon Everett was killed because of jealousies over the affections of a teenage girl. His buried body only discovered because of the mother of one of his killers.
Scientists say they've uncovered the first evidence that malaria-spreading parasites are becoming immune to the world's most effective drug for treating the disease.
Yes, Fiona, malaria is a major global killer which gets far too little attention. Yet the statistics are shocking. Every year there are up to 500 million cases. It causes a fever and if not treated can be fatal. Malaria kills at least 1 million people a year worldwide. Mostly the young. A child dies from the disease every 30 seconds. It's rife in many of the world's poorest countries, the areas marked in red, where healthcare is often very limited. Among them, Cambodia, which has reported the first signs of drug resistance.
A passenger plane with more than 200 on board has gone missing over the Atlantic. The Chancellor, Alistair Darling, hands back £700 to the taxpayer. A battering for America's love affair with the car. Susan Boyle is being treated at a London clinic.
This would be, if it turns out to be, a total disaster, the worst accident in Air France's history and the worst accident for civil aviation in the past 10 years. So there's enormous pressure to find out not only where the plane is, but what happened. And of course it's important because the A330 is one of the great war horses of transatlantic travel. But at the moment here, more mystery than any kind of information.
It was once a symbol of America's industrial might, but today General Motors, the world's second largest car maker, declared itself bankrupt. It won't mean the end of the company. Under a deal with the US government, GM will be relaunched, but at the cost of around 20,000 jobs.
The bankruptcy plan will rescue General Motors from most of its debts and strip it down to size. Famous brands like Pontiac, Saturn, Hummer, Saab and Opel will either be axed or sold off. The future of Vauxhall plants in the UK, like this one at Luton, remain uncertain.
The Honda car factory in Swindon has reopened after closing for 4 months due to a slump in sales. 2 British servicemen who died in Afghanistan on Saturday have been named. Lance Corporal Nigel Moffat of the Light Dragoons and Corporal Stephen Bolger of 1 Para were killed while on operations in Musakala in the south of the country. Now, he was the man who made his name as a woman on stage. The entertainer Danny LaRue has died at the age of 81. The Home Secretary is stepping down. She's not alone. Several other Labour MPs announced they're quitting Parliament altogether. The hunt for the missing Air France plane. How the death of this 5-year-old drove his grieving parents to end their own lives. The last-minute guest, Prince Charles, will attend the D-Day commemorations after a face-saving invitation from the French.
His Home Secretary's going, his Chancellor's damaged, so are other Cabinet Ministers. Is Gordon Brown really going to hang on to them?
Now, some will say there must be some conspiracy here, some attempt to damage Gordon Brown by all these coordinated announcements. I do believe it reflects the individual decisions of individual MPs to get out. That, of course, is no more cheering for Gordon Brown.
From first light, the Brazilian Air Force had been flying missions looking for debris. Then one aircraft reported seeing what looked like plane seats and jet fuel in the water. The items floating in the water were found about 400 miles northeast of a Brazilian island. To underline just how difficult a salvage operation this will be, the debris was found in one of the deepest parts in the Atlantic, 12,000 feet in places, and retrieving the flight data recorders from there, well, that's an immense task.
The deal to save the van maker LDV has collapsed, leaving the future of thousands of workers in doubt. 2 more people in Scotland are in a critical condition in hospital with swine flu.
As Pakistan reeled in shock, the Taliban were quick to claim responsibility. This, they said, was vengeance for the army's operations against them in the Swat Valley. Their message, if you hurt us, we can hit you anywhere in the country.
British forces using Apache helicopters say they've killed one of the most dangerous Taliban leaders in Helmand province in Afghanistan. Another cabinet minister has resigned. Hazel Blears becomes the latest to quit the government.
Al-Qaeda says it killed a British hostage in West Africa. Save our science. Critics say more than half of English schools are relying on a dumbed-down GCSE. And signs of life in the housing market.
So, in the last 24 hours, no fewer than 4 ministers, including the Home Secretary, have come to the same conclusion.
Cabinet resignations are always damaging, but do it on the eve of important elections, and that verges on political sabotage. Hazel Blears has always been known for her loyalty, but today she was sporting a brooch with the words "rocking the boat" emblazoned on it.
Lloyds Banking Group is to cut more than 500 jobs across Britain. A British soldier has been killed in an explosion while on patrol in southern Afghanistan near the town of Jureshk. A pregnant British woman on trial for drug smuggling in Southeast Asia has been found guilty and sentenced to life in jail. Now, could there be a glimmer of hope for the housing market? Some leading builders are starting to report signs of improvement, with the number of interested customers up. It comes as the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee prepares its next interest rate decision. Another person in Scotland has been admitted to hospital with swine flu. It brings to 4 the number there who are critically ill.
So far, we've had 404 confirmed cases of H1N1 swine flu. And swine flu has now spread to 66 countries. But even a mild flu pandemic would cause major disruption, with potentially hundreds of thousands of people off work at any one time.
I've just been emailed the draft of a letter from an MP's office, a letter that it is hoped would be circulated. It says, "We are writing now because we believe that in the current position, the current political situation, you can best serve the Labour Party and the country by stepping down as party leader and Prime Minister." Now, the aim of the MP who has drafted that letter will be to get dozens of names on it. If they do, even if it is not enough under the rules to trigger Gordon Brown's resignation, the aim would be to build the momentum to force him to go.
2 French students killed in a brutal attack in London might be alive today if not for official blunders. A new era, Barack Obama says America is ready to respect Islam. 20 years since the killings in Tiananmen Square, a clampdown in China, but they mark the anniversary in Hong Kong. Where does laughter come from? It turns out the apes were doing it long before us.
President Obama delivered an ambitious manifesto for change in America's relations with Muslim countries and for progress in Middle Eastern peace. He talked about the unbreakable bond between the United States and Israel, but used harsh words about Jewish settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories and sympathetic ones about the lives of Palestinians. If President Obama can't back his words, however well chosen, with deeds that match them, the goodwill he felt on this trip might have gone the next time he visits.
A children's football coach has been jailed for a series of rapes and attacks on 27 women. The Electoral Commission has asked staff at polling stations not to fold European election ballot papers. It follows complaints from the UK Independence Party that the way the papers are folded means their entry is hidden. People are choosing members of 27 county councils and 7 unitary authorities in England, as well as 72 members of the European Parliament across the UK.
News of plotting has infuriated Gordon Brown's allies. Sources have told BBC News that there is absolutely no chance of him standing down, and they say his opponents are trying to create chaos within the party in order to force him to go.
The Bank of England has kept interest rates on hold at 0.5%. The American actor David Carradine has been found dead in a Bangkok hotel room. The 72-year-old appeared in over 100 feature films. His body was discovered in a closet with a cord around his neck. 10 men have been sentenced to a total of 83 years in prison for trying to smuggle £36 million worth of cannabis resin into Britain.
At 6 o'clock, we're in Downing Street, where Gordon Brown is engaged in an all-out effort to hold on to power.
A jury hears how a 7-year-old girl was held prisoner in her own home and deliberately starved to death. And veterans who took part in nuclear tests in the 50s win the right to sue the government.
In a move designed to cause maximum damage, James Purnell, the Work and Pension Secretary, announced in a statement he wasn't only quitting from the cabinet, but asking Gordon Brown to go for the sake of the party. But then another destabilising move beyond the Prime Minister's control. The Defence Secretary John Hutton said he was leaving the government. But then another unwelcome turn of events. Backbencher Ian Gibson, one of 4 Labour MPs who've been barred from standing at the next general election because of their expense claims, said he was quitting now, forcing a by-election. Even as Gordon Brown's fight back got underway, there was news of a fresh resignation by the Europe Minister Caroline Flint, who only yesterday had backed the Prime Minister. She had expected a promotion, but perhaps not got what she wanted. She's accused Gordon Brown of using her as female window dressing.
Thousands of veterans have attended ceremonies across Normandy to mark the 65th anniversary of the D-Day landings.
Just a reminder for you of tonight's news, an emergency reshuffle, as we've been reporting. Labour beaten badly in the local elections in England, and several ministers leaving the cabinet overnight and today. Gordon Brown is holding on and doing his best to.
Yes, it was a tough night, but we fight on for what we believe. I will not waver. I will not walk away. I will get on with the job, and I will finish the work.